This is Thursday, April 22nd. This is World History. Well, we looked at the start of the war for the Japanese yesterday. Today we're going to look at the war of the Germans and Italians against the people we call the Allies. Now, Germany had been aggressive since 1936. In 1938, Hitler wanted a land which is called the Sudetenland. Now, the Sudetenland had been part of Germany before World War I, but had been carved into a brand new country, Czechoslovakia, after World War I. The French and British went to a conference in Munich with Hitler and Mussolini from Italy. And Hitler agreed that if he got the Sudetenland, he would not want to get any more land. When the British and French agree, this is what we call appeasement. And here we see Neville Chamberlain at the London airport holding up the paper, and he said, "It is peace in our time." The appeasement did not work. Let's try this again. The Soviet Union and Germany would sign a non-aggression pact in 1939. Now you have to remember, Hitler became chancellor by saying bad things about the communists. Now Hitler and the communist leader Stalin have agreed to divvy up Poland, although Poland and the world does not know this. Germany would sign an agreement with Italy called the Pact of Steel. And basically it said that if one country was attacked, the other would come to its aid. Hitler and Mussolini agreed to a joint exercise in Africa. Here is a map of Europe. Here is Poland right here. Here's the Soviet Union. Here's Germany. Now this is North Africa down here. In 1939, Germany will invade Poland. It is at this point that Great Britain and France will declare war on Germany. Now the Germans are going to use a new form of fighting called the Blitzkrieg in German, or lightning warfare in English. German forces from the air, the ground, and the sea would pummel an opponent all at the same time. Poland would fall in 30 days. Here is a video that deals with this. At the same time, German forces invaded Poland. They took key agricultural areas of eastern Poland. As the non-aggression pact stated, the Germans would get the western part of Poland, the Russians or Soviets would get the eastern part. With Poland now secure, Germany is going to turn its attention to France. The British will begin to move troops into France. Both France and Britain believed that there would be another trench-type warfare to come about, just like in World War I. The French had constructed a line of forts along the Rhine River. This was the most logical place for the Germans to come across. The French called it the Maginot Line. The Germans instead went north through Belgium, just as they had done in World War I. They are spearheaded by their panzers, or tanks. The Germans will break through the French line along the Marne, and Paris will be captured in less than 30 days. Southern France is going to give up to the Germans. And in Vichy France, that's on the Mediterranean Sea, a new French government will be created. Now, the Vichy French are going to agree to the demands of the Nazis to turn over Jews and political prisoners and send them back to Germany. British soldiers in France were trapped between the sea and the German line. The British soldiers were found in and around Dunkirk. The British Navy and British civilians will take their ships across the English Channel and pick up the survivors of Dunkirk. Who knows what would have happened if all of the people at Dunkirk had been forced to surrender to the Germans. The American ships are beginning to escort British ships. In 1941, the Germans are going to sink the destroyer USS Reuben James. And for all intents purposes, the United States is at war with Germany. Now this happens before Pearl Harbor. So here is France over here. Here is England. And this is where most of the fighting takes place. The Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor saw the U.S. now fighting in two oceans against three opponents, the Germans, Italians, and Japanese, at the same time. President Roosevelt declared that the United States would try to win the war first in Europe. By the end of 1942, the Allies had invaded Italy and had stopped Japanese aggression in the Pacific. Well, the year is 1940. The French have fallen, and now all of continental Europe is under the control of Hitler. Hitler is going to use the airfields in France as an attack on Great Britain. It is dubbed the Battle of Britain. It was for control of the skies over Great Britain. Now you might want to put an asterisk next to this, because this is the first battle in human history that is going to be fought entirely in the air. The first battle is going to see the British best the Germans. German fighters and bombers will coordinate their attack on British citizens. These attacks on British cities are called the Blitz, for Blitzkrieg. British civilians will go into the subway tunnels to escape the bombing. Here we can see Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and he will tell the press that never has so much been owed to so few. Here is kind of a blow-by-blow account of the Battle of Britain. Unable to defeat the British, the Germans are going to lay siege to its islands. The Germans will now take its army and turn it toward the Soviet Union. The one-time ally of the Germans is going to see in 1942 the Germans slicing through the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is going to see quite a few of its citizens killed, quite a few of its soldiers killed. The Germans will have victory after victory. The Germans had defeated the British in North Africa. The Germans and the Italians were getting close to both ends of the Suez Canal. In 1942, the British and American forces will mount an attack on the Germans and Italians in North Africa. The British will come from the east working toward the west. The Americans will come in the west working east. This is what we call a pincer movement. And by the end of 1942, German and Italian troops have been defeated, and most have been forced to surrender. In North Africa, at Casablanca, the British and the Americans decide that the next thing they'll do is invade Italy. Now, here is North Africa here. Here is Italy up here. Now, Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin will meet several times during the war years. In 1943, they will meet in Tehran. Stalin announces that his forces are just about done in. Stalin says, I must have a second front in France. Churchill disagrees, but Roosevelt agrees, and Roosevelt says that the United States will launch an attack on the north coast of France in 1944. With Roosevelt's assurance, Stalin agrees to begin to make preparations to bust out of his defenses and to attack the Germans at the same time. The hope is amongst the three leaders that this coordinated attack will defeat the Germans. The invasion of France by the British and the Americans would be the turning point of the war in Europe. A loss would mean another year before a new invasion could be mounted. A loss would most likely mean that the Soviets would have to sign a peace treaty with the Nazis now free of having to fight the Soviets. Most likely the Americans and British would have to sue for peace. The US and British are going to land in France. They are going to push the Germans out of France, push the Germans into Holland and Belgium by 1945. Russian forces will liberate the lands of the old Austria-Hungarian Empire and will be on the border of Germany in 1945. This video here talks about the invasion of France and its importance. By 1945, Hitler had committed suicide and the German military would surrender in May of 1945. Soon after the surrender, trials were scheduled for Germans who had started the war and Germans who had committed atrocities against civilians, in particular the Holocaust. Well, I think this is as far as we can go today. Tomorrow we'll look at the Japanese, and we will also look at what happened after the war. Now again, my feeling is that next week we will need to have some type of a quiz. Right now though, I don't exactly know what day.